Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Um, yeah, I didn't record on the final whistle yesterday because I was at my parents'. It was my mum's birthday, actually. So, before you start saying, why haven't you done it on the final whistle? All right. I've got a life as well. I have a life. I have a family. All right. I would, truth be told, I was going to do one when I got home. But I was actually in a foul mood. I was in a bad mood. It's not like we've not seen us lose to Liverpool before. Don't get me wrong. I think there were some sort of positives to be had from it, maybe. At the same time, I just felt a bit and still feel a little bit emotionally spent. I was talking about this in the preview. Patreon.com/RTRpod. And on there, I was saying I'm really sort of seeking to try and be a bit more objective when I do these kind of pods, when I do the previews, when I do the after game ones, because I do appreciate the fact that perhaps sometimes my perspective is a bit sullied by this intrusive thought that I keep having at the moment that Spurs are like doomed, that we're in like this death cycle. And I don't think it's an entirely irrational thing to feel. If I'm speaking of myself, because I don't want to say I'm irrational, but you know what I'm saying? I don't think it's entirely irrational to feel that Spurs' direction has been downward for the past few years, that we've lacked a sense of real cohesion in the respect that we don't seem to have a clear plan going forwards. Our managerial appointments would indicate that. The way in which we conduct transfers would indicate that. So it does feel like things have sort of come to a bit of a head at Spurs. I think the step on from this, I think the step on that is perhaps plaguing my thinking quite a bit of the time is this is going to, and I say this is an intrusive thought, don't get me wrong, but this is going to end up in us getting relegated or something like that. People can debate that. I've chatted to various people. Some people will say, I feel you. Other people are saying to me, 0% chance Tottenham get relegated. I'll leave that to, that's not for me to tell you how to feel. But sort of back to the original point is, I just felt a little bit emotionally spent after yesterday's game. I did a tweet to the effect of just being like, you know what, I think this is the most dislikable Spurs team I've seen in my entire life. I honestly think there's maybe 2 or 3 players from this team that I wouldn't want to lose. The rest can go and blah, 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 blah. Do you know what I mean? Just totally just like lashing out at them. And I just sort of, I've deleted it today because I thought I can't be bothered for that. I can't be bothered for moaning in that way. It's definitely an emotional reaction, but yeah, I just sort of, I wanted to sort of gather my thoughts a little more as opposed to trying to force out one of these last night when it was going to be later anyway. It wasn't going to be on the final whistle. It was going to be later. I was a bit tired. As I say, I just felt a bit spent. And I didn't just want to sit there for a period of time being like, that was awful. This was terrible. I don't like this player. I don't like that player. I thought that was stupid by Simmons or Romero or whatever. It may end up going that way. Who knows? We'll see. But I think my sort of dust settled reaction was that it was nice to see the team, even with 9 men and even respective of the whole kind of, why couldn't they have done that from the start of the game? It was nice to see the players at least rouse towards the end. It actually looked like, funnily enough, it looked like we had Liverpool rattled towards the end. So that was that was a positive. I think one of my, I'll say one of the things I'm most frustrated about with that was it's kind of double-edged. I'm annoyed because, and I'm not saying this is a cheap shot. They beat us. They've beaten us again. They always beat us. I get that. But this Liverpool side aren't good. Like I was watching that yesterday, and I was thinking, God, how far this fixture has fallen. When I think about the sort of games that we witnessed between Spurs and Liverpool, those hotly contested matches, Pochettino versus Klopp for the most part, and how far both of them have fallen. I mean, Liverpool won the league last year, so fair enough. They've gone, they're going through this grieving process of Diogo Jota. It's not for me to sort of say whether or not they are. That's what they say is happening. So we'll take them on their word for that. But they still, I don't know, it's not really going for them at the moment, is it? I would say. And I was watching them yesterday thinking they look as beatable as I've seen them in a really long time. In a really long time, since they sort of started to get their acts together. When you think about when they went through them, basically when they got that Ian Graham guy in, that's when their fortunes changed, isn't it? Midway through Brendan Rodgers' tenure, things started to look up for Liverpool Football Club, and they haven't looked back. But I did feel like that Liverpool team was really beatable. I'm frustrated because it's another loss at home. It's another loss in general. If I just read out, I don't know, I'm sure this has been seen. Let me just find it. It's our run of results. So Tottenham's last 8 Premier League fixtures. The graphic is doing the rounds, but when you actually stop to sort of look at it, it's loss, draw, loss, loss, draw, win against Brentford at home, loss, loss. I think the sort of us showing up and getting beaten stuff has become weirdly normalized. And this is a bleed through from last year, I feel. I'm not blaming Postecoglou entirely for this, but I do think he fanned the flames of it. The fact that a lot of the conversation is, from the Mickey van der Ven interview and the sort of stuff that people say is that, he threw the league and all that type of stuff. I think there has been a sort of a sense of normalcy applied to Spurs losing matches. And I think that's bled over into this game, into this season to a degree. But it's not. This isn't an Ange Postecoglou versus Thomas Frank thing. I find that whole thing, frankly, quite tedious. People are well within their rights to be frustrated. People who loved Ange Postecoglou, to see him go, fine. I don't think we need every single match a comparison between the two of them. Ange is gone. He's not the manager anymore. Fine. Will Thomas Frank be able to do a job? That remains to be seen. It looks less likely by the day. But ultimately, it all bleeds back to the ownership. I went on Anfield Index. Lad called Harry, he hosted me on there to just sort of talk about Spurs at the moment. It's Anfield Index. It's obviously a Liverpool podcast. And I was probably, I had the hump that day, so it probably wasn't the most uplifting listen. But my point there was ultimately that all roads lead back to the people that have run the club. The Spurs have, as I was sort of saying at the top, I think we've arrived at a place now where we're at the kind of the head of what has been festering, the boil that has been sort of maturing over the past few seasons, really, has come to a head, and now is the time to change it. Good pal of mine, Adam, he tweeted yesterday from the darts. I'm not sure if he was there or if it was just a video that had been shared from the darts. Sorry, but it was, again, it was the whole everyone at Ali Pally singing Tottenham get battered everywhere they go. And it's kind of a meme, isn't it? It's kind of a joke, but at the same time, that sort of thing, Spursy, just the way Spurs are spoken about in general. Look at the lead up to the Europa League final. It was all Tottenham don't win games like this. Tottenham, I mean, it's based on nothing, really. Yeah, it's based on a sense of recency, but historically speaking, Spurs have always won stuff, and I think that's been the frustration for us when you hear Gary Neville or somebody like that going on about Tottenham don't win these type of games. We've won the UEFA Cup twice before. We won it 3 times now, but at that point we'd won it twice before. You know, until sort of like the modern era, we were the team that had won the FA Cup the most amount of times. First team in the last century to win the double. All this stuff. Yeah, I get it. I know you won the league in black and white, all this type of stuff. But just the way in which these sort of myths are perpetuated that Spurs don't win stuff. Spurs aren't the type of club that can win a final. We always have been. And that changed when ENIC, Daniel Levy and everyone took over, didn't they? And I appreciate this stuff is all a bit of a broken record. I know this is it's a variation on the same theme that has played out over the past few years, but I think it gets more and more profound. The effect of the mismanagement gets more and more profound the further we go on. This isn't entirely a reflection on Spurs losing a game to Liverpool. Spurs lose games to Liverpool. This is what happens. But what I'm talking about is this greater picture that we are a part of right now, where Spurs continue to lose games. And as I say, a lot of people I speak to, a lot of people I see just posting, just in an anecdotal sense, when I look on Twitter, Instagram, anything, Facebook, you see people talking about them just feeling so emotionally detached from the club. There was a really good point. Somebody on the Discord said to me, sorry, I want to dig it out because I want to see the point that you made and I want to attribute it. Oh, it's taking ages to load. So one of the patrons on Discord said as well, what they find quite sad about Spurs right now, and this really hit home for me because I feel this. They were saying that, like, as bad as Spurs have always been, there's always been this like cheeky little bit of hope in the back of their heads where it's like, yeah, we're useless, but we might still do something. We're Spurs at the end of the day and we'll show them all. And he was just saying that little bit of hope, that hopeful little voice has kind of gone a bit. And I do kind of feel that. I feel that, like, to some degrees, I feel that, like, Bilbao was the ripple of, you know, all of it. Sonny was like the sort of the you know, the dying star, if you like. Sonny was like the last bit of that joyful sort of period we had under Mauricio Pochettino and the various sort of little highs we've had after that point. But seeing that team slowly fade out, but Sonny being the one there to stay, get his hands on a trophy, it was like the ultimate echo of glory, wasn't it? That's the thing. But it's like when you think about those sort of the highs of, you know, getting to a Champions League final that summer, navigating the Champions League competition and the sort of years that had come prior to that, 16, 17, the last year at White Hart Lane, all that type of stuff. It felt like it was only ever going to get better from there. And as I sort of say, we didn't capitalise on that, and we haven't done. And look, I appreciate now it's going down a sort of doom mongering route, and that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is sort of try at least grasp onto some might call it naive, but at least a sense of hope that the Lewis family, ENIC still, but they are going to change their tune. They are going to change the way they do things. There's been some trust me bro ITK type stuff during the week that has been talking about the way in which Daniel Levy structured deals, the way in which Daniel Levy structured loans, and, you know, just wrapped up within these loans was an inherent sense that Spurs would not be able to compete at a certain level on the pitch. There would be caps on spending for wages, for transfers, all that type of thing, because we'd borrowed money in a way that, you know, suggested that we would do that. By all accounts, this Peter Charrington, who the Lewis family work with, I literally think he is like Joe Lewis's personal money dude, whatever. You know, like don't ask me about this. I'll get Levynomics back on and he can explain it better. But whatever, Peter Charrington is apparently on the case of restructuring a lot of these loans, restructuring a lot of these deals. Look, this could all be nonsense. But if it's not, then maybe that does spell sort of good news for Spurs. I know there was a bit of dejection this week that Spurs have pulled out of the race for Antoine Semenyo. It seems to be that his heart is set on going to Manchester City or to Liverpool. Manchester United, I think, are floating around in the conversation. And I know a lot of people, and I don't completely discount this, I know a lot of people took the Antoine Semenyo thing as, this is typical Spurs. Look at us, we're not putting up a fight, we're blah, 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 blah. Do you know what I mean? That type of thing. I don't really take it that way. I think it's kind of smarter to be like, right, the lad doesn't fancy us at the moment, then we don't want him. We're gonna exit these conversations. We want people that are going to come here. Look at Xavi Simons, right? Would he have joined us in January, given how we're playing right now? I don't know. Who knows? Like, we can only speculate about that. But at least Xavi Simons, he was saying in those little interviews and things that he was doing recently, he wanted to join Spurs. He was excited about the project. Mickey van der Ven, before he, on his Gary Neville interview, before he joined, was saying, he had his mates being like, oh, you can't join Tottenham. And that in itself is a problem, right? When we're talking about the ownership needing to reverse the image of the club, that type of thing, it shows you that it does have an impact. It's not just a load of West Ham fans coked up at the darts singing Tottenham get battered everywhere they go. That stuff clearly has a bleed through. Do you know what I mean? When you've actually got a player who's going to sign for us and his mates are saying to him, don't sign for them because they don't win anything, that is a problem. That is a problem that's reflective of the club. But Mickey van der Ven fought through that. He said, no, I want to go there. I want to go there. I'm going to win something with them. And he did. We want players like that. We want players that want to come here, right? As well, let's just be honest about it. Like, if you had the chance to come to Spurs or to go to Manchester City or Liverpool, if he had no affiliation to Spurs, he's actually a gooner as well. That's the thing, and a loud and proud one too, as well. I'm pretty sure. Then of course he's going to go there. What is more damaging? What is more damaging for the club, in my opinion, is things like the Eza deal in summer, where we're hanging around. There's this big protracted sort of nonsense around the deal that, are we going to make a bid? Are we not? Are we calling on him? Are we not? We've had a conversation with Parish. He's had a conversation with it. We don't want all that noise. We've got him for Semenyo. We've identified him as, he's one of the better players. He's one of the better players in his position in the Premier League, at least in a performance basis. I know a lot of the stats nerds aren't that hot on him, but I think in an eye test sense anyway, he seems a good player. He seems like a sound investment for a team that wants a pretty explosive, high impact, physical, technically sound winger who can score goals. We've identified him as someone that we wanted to add to the team. We've made an approach. We've obviously gotten noises from him or his camp that he's not interested in us, and we move on. And I think that's good. I think that's good that Spurs are doing that. But that doesn't mean we should give up there. That means, there's some talk that we're after Akliouche, the lad from Monaco, who looks very, very talented. I think we were linked to him a lot in summer. Who knows? I don't know. Ruben Neves is another name that's been thrown into the mix. The fact of the matter is, though, that Spurs need to buy players that can be ready to compete now. Does Akliouche fulfill that brief? I don't know. But we need to have some players that can bolster the first team now. I think it's great having Vusković's. I think it's great having Bergvalls. I think it's great having Greys, Odebears, Tells, all fantastic players, and I rate them all. And I don't really like, and I've spoken about it on here, I don't really like the sort of discussions that we have around Gray or whoever like that. Is he good enough? Is he not? He's a teenager. Like we're making judgments on a lad that, had Manchester City signed Archie Gray, he'd be getting piecemeal appearances here and there, right? He wouldn't be chucked into the first team right now. He would be slowly sort of fed into the team piece by piece. But Spurs don't do that because we don't invest in the first, well, at least we haven't to this point, haven't invested in the first team sufficiently. So we're chucking these young players, we're giving them this baptism of fire, and then we're drawing conclusions about them or their quality based off of the fact that they're a teenager that's been played way too early and been given far too much responsibility. That's a failing again on the club. That's not a personnel issue. Because when you start to say, Bergval's no good, Gray's no good, Tell's no good, Odebear's no good, I don't really buy that. I don't really buy that, 4 very promising young players are all no good. Again, the context of it all is always Tottenham. The context of it all is always, how do we perform as a team? How do we perform as a club? And more often than not, the answer to that is poorly. So, look, I'm trying to drink away from the mic there. Apologies. Maybe Yannick, Lewis family, they are going to change that, though. Maybe they are. I think there are certain indications that they are going to. I think the Xavi Simons deal in itself probably is an indication, even though it was back in the summer, even though Levy was still there, still sort of clinging on at that point, there was still an indication there that they are maybe going to do things a bit differently. I suppose this is a fine time to talk about Xavi Simons from yesterday. The red card. Now, if I'm brutally honest, I've already been told on Twitter that I don't understand football. Okay, fine, fair enough. I don't see the consternation. I don't get what we're going on about. It's a clear as day red. I get the whole, it's one of those tackles that looks worse when it's slowed down and all that type of thing. It was clumsy. It was late. His studs are high. That's not a VAR thing. I think a referee in any era, if they've got a clear view on that, gives that as a red card. And yes, I totally appreciate that there's inconsistencies in the way in which VAR is implemented, because there's a compilation of the many times a player has done a similar challenge on Tottenham Hotspur, on a Tottenham Hotspur player, and not been, red carded or probably even yellow carded for it. And I get that that's frustrating. And I get that the inconsistency in refereeing and officiating in the Premier League is very, very frustrating. But I'm going to be brutally honest, I'm not going to lose a lot of energy claiming that Xavi Simons tackle foul is not something that I've seen a red card given for. Ripped through Virgil van Dijk's socks. I think it broke his skin from the sort of bit I could see on Sky Sports when they were showing it. It was reckless. It was late. It was silly. It was silly. He didn't, it was. I don't, I'm not going to deny that. And I think it was. And, it's frustrating. It was frustrating to see him go. But again, he's come out, he's owned up to it. He's held his hands up. He's apologized. That's fine. We get on with it. I'm not, I'm more going to use that as something to hold against him, to say God, that's so stupid. That's this. If anything, whether it's reckless, whether it's stupid, late, this or that, yep, heat of the moment, there's a frustration with that. But also, bigger picture, I like to see that we've still got a player that's wanting to get stuck in, that's wanting to fight for every ball. Isn't that what we've wanted for ages? I don't know. I don't know. I think, here's what it is. Here's what it is. He got red cards and it's done. Christian Romero, I'm probably a bit less apologetic for, in a way that, I'm saying now, I quite like that there's some fight there with Xavi Simons and all that type of thing. It was reckless. It was a bit late. It's sort of one of those instances where it gets given. Sometimes it gets given. It doesn't get given at other times. Christian Romero's is just, again, it's like a moment of madness. It's irritating because he's now the club captain and he's on a yellow card. The first yellow card was nonsense. I get that. But then he's lashing out off the ball right in front of the referee. It's just, I don't know. And I get it. I get that he's a fiery character, right? He's got the caliente, the Argentinian fiery blood running through his veins, all that type of stuff. But come on, man. You are a club captain. But you kind of just, I'll tell you one thing I've got to say. Now I'm saying this, one thing that really irritates me about it is like Gary Neville in particular has a real bee in his bonnet with Christian Romero. He does. Gary Neville is always, oh, he's been very naughty there. Oh, he's been a naughty boy there. Always, every time. Oh, I think he's going to be lucky there. Always, right? Always. He played under Roy Keane for years. Roy Keane, yeah, well, this year you shouldn't be acting this way. Roy Keane was a filthy, dirty, disgusting player on the football pitch. Disgusting. Like, absolutely disgraceful. Whatever you think about it, what he did to Haaland's father was disgusting. It's absolute thuggery. Like, and it goes beyond just being like a roughhousing footballer. Like, it's thuggery. It's almost like sociopathic thuggery, right? Yet he was held up on such a pedestal of being this mighty warrior on the football pitch for Alex Ferguson, all that type of thing, you know? It's a man that was so unable to keep his emotions in check that he abandoned his country at a World Cup, you know, because he fell out with a manager. And I've got a certain level of affection for Roy Keane, to be honest, now in his latter days and all that type of thing. And I don't say this stuff in a pearl clutchy way. I don't really say this stuff in the respect that, like, you know, oh, how terrible of him to. I mean, the Haaland thing was disgraceful, to be honest, but just his general sort of play, how rough he was, how in everyone's face he was. You know, fine. You know, he was a captain of one of the most successful Premier League football teams of all time. What irritates me is like this revisionism around Christian Romero. Oh, won't you think of the children? Oh, you know, look at how nasty he is all the time. He's not remotely as nasty as somebody like Roy Keane was back in the day. Like I say, this Roy Keane that's held up. I think as a Spurs fan, yes, he's a club captain, and I do have real frustrations of his petulance. Like yesterday it was so stupid from him. It was so stupid. It was so completely needless, but you know, maybe it's that fire in him that makes him the good player that he is. You know, I know, I get it. It's probably making excuses for him. It's making excuses for doing stuff like that, stupid stuff like that, stuff that, you know, you would not really want your club captain to be doing, to be leading by a certain example. But also, again, maybe when you take a step back from it all, maybe that's exactly what we need. You know, from everything I've been talking about at the top, the sort of the lack of fight, the lack of application from a lot of these players. Maybe a lot of them need to see their captain fighting for stuff. I mean, that's not really fighting, though. Sorry, I'm going to check myself there, because I still think it was silly. I still think it was petulant. I don't think that was like Christian Romero giving a great example of anything. I think it was stupid. It was a moment of madness from him, and it's something he needs to get out of his game, really. But as I say, the sort of the atmosphere that's created around Christian Romero still irritates me. I don't like the pearl clutching about it from the media, and you know, as Sil in The Sopranos would have said, it's anti-Italian discrimination. It's anti-Argentinian discrimination. That's what it is. It all goes back to Thatcher. It goes back to Thatcher in the Falklands, the sinking of the Belgrano, all that. That's what they're doing. That's what they're going on about there. Hang on. I'm just going to have a sip of coffee. I'm going to mute myself. It's quite handy. I've got this new mic, and there's like a... what is it? Is it a mixer? I don't know. It's a fancier mic. You've got to run it through a kind of a little, like this thing, something with dials and wires and stuff on it. And there's actually a handy little mute button on it. So when I do have to cough or have a slurp of water or coffee or something like that, then I can. I've got quite a few questions in. Quite a few of you up nice and early. James 83 says, morning. I get the overwhelming impression that most of the squad just don't get what it means to play for Tottenham. It's difficult, like, because I sort of know what you mean, James. I do think like we're in a... you know, we talk about like games gone and all that type of stuff. I do think we're in quite a different moment with football nowadays, where players and their affections, their affiliations for clubs and everything are very different. I think the world is very different. I definitely feel that way, but then I wonder how many players do really get what it means to play for their club, if you know what I mean. Do they really care that much? Or do they just care about the project that they're a part of? Do they care about the teammates or the unity that's been gathered there? I think about, so say, for example, I think about Arsenal, right? Or you think about Manchester City, some of the great Manchester City teams. I don't know how many of their players are like, Bukayo Saka or a Phil Foden. I'm sure they care about playing for teams that they've grown up supporting, but the rest of the lads are probably just happy that they're playing with some good players. Do you know what I mean? They're probably just happy that their club is trending in a direction that is positive, that they might be able to win some big stuff. And we sort of saw the cracks of Tottenham's approach come through, didn't we? When, Kyle Walker left 16-17, and then Danny Rose goes and has a chat with the Sun and says that Spurs need to start signing players that we don't have to Google. And I don't think we've ever stopped doing that, really, for the most part, have we? I think, sort of to my point about the owners needing to act a bit differently, we need to start bringing in more of those players that are recognisable, really, to give everyone a lift, to give everyone a boost. And maybe then they will get what it means to at least play for a team that is trying to achieve something, even if, they're not deeply wedded to the lore of Bill Nick and all that type of stuff. It was quite, I've got to say, it was quite nice from the club, even though, like I think I said at the time, I had a slightly cynical view of it. I do think it was good that the club did that piece with Xavi Simons, taking him around the area to the local boozers, all that type of thing, sort of steeping, like getting him invested in the history of the club and the area and all that type of thing. I think it's quite good. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, whatever. I know. Fridge is on fire says, what else does Frank need to do to get the sack? The players are out of control, and that's because he hasn't got a hold on the dressing room. What does Frank need to do to get the sack? I don't know. I think January looks like we should be able to navigate January. I would hope. I mean, who knows? Who knows with this Tottenham team right now? I'd like to think we'd be able to navigate January. February, if you've had a look at our fixtures, is vile. That I think that's probably where. I reckon that I think they are going to stay true to their word and give him a year, unless it really looks like we are spiraling towards the danger zone in the highway to the danger zone. If we start plummeting towards that sort of side of the thing, then and we're getting thrashed every other week, then I think that's when they're probably going to bin him off. But as James says, I don't blame Frank. This has been going on for years. Yeah. Again, I think it's a case, and I said this of Ange, and I feel it of Frank too. I think they've both invariably been played a bad hand. I do think they have. I don't think they're playing it particularly well either. But I don't need to keep talking about Ange. Let's talk about Frank. I think he has been dealt a bad hand, but I don't think he's playing it well. And when we're talking about him being dealt a bad hand, we did have one of the better transfer windows we've had in quite some time this summer. So it's not been that bad, the hand that he's been dealt, if we're being sort of brutally honest about it, right? Marcy says, the only reason we won't get relegated is the quality of poor teams that are currently in the bottom three. Comes to something when you have to be grateful for that small crumb of comfort. I do know what you're saying, and I do think that's pretty much bang on, Marcy, but I think the factor that we have going for us is that people would love to see us go down. And I feel that if it started to look like it was a more realistic prospect, Sky, etc., would be like creating graphics. Tottenham going to go down. Big bottom 3 weekend, all that type of stuff when we're playing whoever. Every single game of ours being billed as a relegation battle, relegation fight. How much that would get the tails up of the opposition to be one of the team, to be one of the players that could be held up at occasions like the darts as being the man that sent Tottenham down. I think the power of that stuff is intoxicating and it's dangerous. Isle of Lily White says, morning Jack pod with a coffee. Go on then. Good lad. Good morning. And also says, angriest I've been after a game in a long time. Completely pressed the self-destruct button. We were the better team with 11, 10 and 9 men. Tough to defend Romero after that one. Hopefully he learns. I mean, yeah, I do think we were probably the better team. There wasn't much in it though, was it? It was a really largely quite poor affair, I think. Errors 7000 says, just apathy now. Not expecting to win at the weekends. Boring football and no direction. Yeah, I don't really disagree with that entirely. I think there's a lot in there. But as I say, I'm trying my best to be like at least a bit more positive about it. I'm trying to just cling on to that last little bit of hope, you know? The hope that the riders of Rohan are just over there, waiting on the cliff top to come, you know. Shut up. Echo Sonic Music says, even the pre-match warm-ups are so low energy, which follows into the match. Yesterday they woke up but were already out of the game. MJBTHFC 1991 says, was the first half hour a good performance like Frank said? I thought the tempo was too slow and ponderous yet again. Also hearing the word proud a lot, but it was a dull game before the late chaos. Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that, mate. I think the thing that was funny is I feel that like Liverpool were playing in a remarkably un-Liverpool-like way, and I can see why they, despite having won the league last year, aren't that enamored with Slot, a lot of the fans, because it felt like Liverpool were trying to Arsenal it a bit. They were trying to suck the life out of the game a bit. Quite a few hoofballs from them. Yeah, it wasn't a particularly pretty affair, and Spurs didn't really have a lot of answers for it, did they? And that's to me is always the worrying thing about Frank. He doesn't seem to be that good at thinking on his feet, to addressing kind of issues as and when he sees them. And you know, unlike with Ange Postecoglou, where I think ultimately one of the frustrations of Ange was always I feel like he was a coach that had the ability to be able to switch things up, as we saw in the Europa League run, right? But he was dogmatic to his principles. Frank, I'm not even sure if there's like a level of dogma to it. My bigger concern with Frank is that he simply doesn't really know how to switch a game up, because there's so little invention there. There's so little kind of demonstrable change or adaptation to the squad we have or the circumstances that we find ourselves in, that it leads me to worry about him, about the coaches around him. I don't know. Eris 7000 says as well, in caps, how have you fallen for the PR? It's the same people running the club. Nothing has changed. I know that. And I say that. To be fair, I say that all the time, mate. Like, I haven't fallen for anything. As I say, I'm just, I can't come on here how many times? I do a podcast like 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 sometimes. Right? I can't sit on every single podcast and say, it's terrible, ENIC are awful, this is bad. You have to at least hope that they are going to change in some way. And what I am saying is that I think there are certain cues that you can see that would indicate that there are certain little changes that are happening. I'm skeptical as to how much it's going to change overall. And if you were to ask me down the pub, if we were having a casual conversation about it, right, and it wasn't one that was like, consigned to record, I would say to you, my gut feeling is I don't think ENIC are going to change. I do think it is all smoke and mirrors. I think they're the same people that have been in charge for 20 years who have sacked Daniel Levy to chuck him under the bus because they felt the heat growing on ENIC as an entity, fan protests and all that type of thing. But they were still his boss for the past 2 decades. So, I've said all this stuff before, and I still kind of feel that way. But what I am trying to do is at least apply a bit of objectivity to things and separate my own sort of gut feeling, which is a gut feeling, which, okay, is based on, as I say, 20 years of watching Spurs and watching the way in which they operate, ENIC operate. But still, to be slightly more objective about it is to recognize the fact that, yeah, they've done a couple of things that are different, and it feels like there's a couple of things in motion, at least, that are slightly different. That's it. It's not falling for club PR. It's just, it's just discussing it. That's all I'm saying. Mr. Stephen Stotch says, I think we're in a genuine relegation battle. The players failed him yesterday, but even on the ball before the sending off, we looked horrible. I know you laugh, but Redknapp for 6 months could work out better than this to get us playing again. I only laugh, mate, because Redknapp's been out of the game for so long. Like, I get your point in terms of like a manager like Redknapp could come in and do it. I think Harry Redknapp himself, I think, is, I'm not sure to be ageist about it, but he's an old guy. Like, he's, for the past 10 years now, he's been making adverts and stuff like that. He's not a football manager anymore, really. I think the time for him to come in and save Spurs as some sort of Gus Hiddink figure, I think, is kind of gone. Now, I would say a contemporary Harry Redknapp figure that plays genuinely remarkably similar football, or at least has a similar ethos in many ways, is Brendan Rodgers. A lot of people don't like. I don't like Brendan Rodgers. I've said for years, I hate the idea of him coming anywhere near the club. But if there was somebody, if you wanted like that Redknapp type thing where it would be fun for a while, and I don't deny there would be. Like, I don't deny that if Brendan Rodgers, got a contract to the end of the season, I'm sure Spurs would play some really nice football at times. My issue with Brendan Rodgers has always been his lack of long-term vision, because his teams always fall off a cliff, quite drastically as well. But Brendan Rodgers has got a new job now anyway. So, but look, I get what you mean. Look, if there's a coach out there that can, breathe a bit of life into this, get Spurs playing in a more entertaining fashion, that's going to get the fans more on sides, that's going to just basically give the whole place a lift, then yeah, I'm all ears. But I don't think Redknapp is, I just, like I say, mate, I think he's been out. I'm not laughing because I think you're like silly or anything like that. It's fine. It's fine to have your own opinion on it. We had some great times under Harry Redknapp, and I don't deny that. I'm not one of these kind of holier than thou types that's all like, but Harry Redknapp, right, we had a good laugh under him, but he was never really a proper football manager. He was brilliant for us. It was the Harry Redknapp era was one of the most fun times that there's ever been to follow Spurs. That was a time when I would actually go to games as well. Turn up at White Hart Lane, it was like a massive party almost every week. It was really good fun. It was really, really good. Spurs played some beautiful, beautiful football. But I think that's sort of, if we're already, let's put it this way, if we're already having conversations about the suitability of Mauricio Pochettino to return, a guy who is still actively in football management, and I'm talking about people saying the game has left him behind a bit and all that type of thing, right? I think that is magnified under somebody like Harry Redknapp. And I hope you appreciate, Stephen, I'm not taking the piss out of you here. I'm trying to give you my rationale why I think that, Harry Redknapp to the end of the season. I mean, you might be taking the piss out of me saying this, to be fair. Let's get him to talk about that Harry Redknapp thing again. I don't know. Maybe that's what you're doing. Maybe it's skullduggery. In terms of, I think we're in a genuine relegation battle, I don't scoff at that, mate. I'm not sat here saying the sky is falling and that's definitely going to happen to us. But as I have been saying over the course of this podcast, I'm not as comfortable as a lot of other Spurs fans are that it's not in any way, shape or form at least a threat for Tottenham. We're not playing very well at all. We're not playing well. Capote says, fouls can be so subjective that there's always a ton of different opinions. That's why VAR doesn't work in football. Bingo, bang on. I thought the biggest red card was the Van der Ven tackle on Isaac. He sort of scissored him, didn't he? Yeah, but I agree with you on the VAR point. VAR, I mean, the way it was originally spoken about was essentially to highlight things that we've always seen. There'd always been those things in the Premier League era, right, where referee is in one section of the pitch following the play, and off the ball you see whoever, a Roy Keane or a Duncan Ferguson or somebody clobber somebody off the ball when the referee can't see it, and you hear the whole crowd reacting, you hear the whole stadium reacting, you see a player rolling around on the floor, and the referee's looking around thinking, what's happened there? I don't know what's happened there. That's where VAR needs to step in and say, right, go have a look at the screen. When you were up that end of the pitch, he's gone and headbutted him down there. He needs to be sent off. That's where you can use VAR. Do you know what I mean? When it's not, there's no sort of, when it's just an objective decision-making basis. All this type of thing, though, is that a red card? Is this not a red card? Because as I say, like Xavi Simons, you see those ones given, you see them not given. And that's the frustrating thing, the inconsistency with it all. Dino says, morning, that was a shambles of a game, pure and simple. Nothing to be hopeful about. It's utter chaotic. I mean, yeah, I know what you're saying, Dino. It was, I think, look, I'm not telling you how to feel. I'm just saying, at least that little fight towards the end, the little fight towards the end of that game, I think, is something to maybe just sort of hold on to. That there's at least maybe something there, a little bit of something there. Sam Statham says, glad your lot are a bunch of headless cockerels because the Reds were utterly dreadful versus 11-10 and especially 9. So I'm guessing Sam is a Liverpool fan. And yeah, as I say, I was saying at one point that, we weren't, I wasn't saying it to score points. I didn't think you were very good. I was shocked to see the way Liverpool were playing. I do think you've got a really good side. And I think, there are obviously factors there. We've spoken about it at the top, but yeah, it was just not, there was no real, it wasn't a spectacle, was it? It wasn't the sort of game that you'd expect. And, not even Klopp versus Pochettino. Spurs and Liverpool are two sides that have always, it's often worked out better for Liverpool, but still they're two sides that have always held on to principles that means that we approach football matches to have fun, right? For people to enjoy watching the sport, to play in a certain way, to play with a sort of an air of sort of, a flurry of passion and all that type of thing, swashbuckling football. But I don't think either of those sides are were demonstrating that yesterday by any stretch of the imagination. I guess the counter to that is that football has changed, and the football teams that seem to be successful are ones that play this sort of negative anti-football. So maybe we're, I don't know, getting sucked into it. It's, I don't know. But yeah, I don't. Funnily enough, right, considering sort of some of the games of yesteryear and all this type of thing, I don't really feel any, I don't feel any ill will towards Liverpool. I don't really feel that. I feel quite annoyed with the officials in some ways. I think what one thing that did irritate me, I will say, is I feel that Spence, and I don't know if this is he's got a reputation or whatever thing, or if the referee has just had a blind spot for it yesterday. I felt that Spence kept getting really unfairly reffed, in particular Spence, during that game. I think there was an occasion right at the beginning when, is it Conor Bradley? Spence turned him inside out and Bradley basically slipped over, got given as a foul. Later on, I think there was, I don't think it was a clear penalty, but again, it was like a 50-50 I've seen them given type penalty that was just completely waved away by the referee on Spence. I think I want to say there were a couple more incidents of Spence, being adjudged to have fouled somebody when I don't think he had. But aside from that, I don't feel any ill will for Liverpool from yesterday. It was a drab game, and as he says here, Sam Statham says, two thoroughly unserious teams. Just not replacing their proper players adequately enough, and that's something we can feel you on. When you look at the old Pochettino teams, till you look at the sort of the quality of players there: Eriksen, Ali, Alderweireld, Vertonghen, blah 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 blah. Said all these names a million times before. We never replaced any of them, did we? We never replaced any of them, at least sufficiently whatsoever. So this is what's going to happen, isn't it? Stagger says, Martin O'Neill to the end of the season, question mark. I quite like Martin O'Neill, I think he's a decent lad. I liked there's a really good old video doing the rounds of doing the rounds. It's been out there for years. I think it was when they were doing like BBC comms duty, maybe, I'm not sure World Cup it was, maybe 2010 or something like that. But I think you had, so it was Adrian Charles doing the presenting, and the panel was Martin O'Neill, Cannavaro, and I'm not sure who else it was, but it was a couple of really big players. And Adrian Charles was sort of taking the piss. He was being like, these two big superstars and Martin O'Neill. And Martin O'Neill's just like, Martin O'Neill, the only one with a Champions League winners medal. And they're all just shook. They're all shut up. And I do think a lot of people, they sort of forget, he played for Dortmund for a large part of his career and was a decent footballer. He's a good player, Martin O'Neill. He was a good manager. I remember him back in the day with Leicester. I think he managed Aston Villa, didn't he, for a while, and was all right. I'll take him to the end of the season. If that's kind of what it comes to, I think he's all right. Maybe it was. I've been told it was maybe Vieira who he was in the part of the panel with. So yeah, it was. It's good. It's quite nice. Quite nice little clap back. Look, it's no Boxing Day football because it's all gone woke, hasn't it? No Boxing Day football, but it's been a very, very bizarre year. The year is not over yet, is it? So there will be a few more pods to come in that time. But try, if you are celebrating, enjoy Christmas. If you're not celebrating Christmas, at least enjoy the time off, if you got any time off with work or anything like that. Eat, drink, be merry. don't dwell on Spurs too much. You know, it's supposed to be fun. I mean, I say this, but it's all going to plague us all till the day we all die, isn't it? That's the truth of the matter. Stuck with them. Thanks for tuning in. I'm not going to do an end of year. Thanks for listening to all the pods this year in 2024, because there's going to be more. I'm going to be doing one tomorrow. So, you know, no need for all the maudlin sentiment yet. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your weekend, you know? How about that? Come on, you Spurs, up the Spurs, whatever.